I'm going to call Sue Moroney.
It's a real pleasure to rise and participate in this debate about a bill that would make a great difference to, I believe, a rising number of people in our society. Because, Mr Chair, this bill, brought in the name of the Honourable David Parker, seeks quite simply to ensure that contractors, people who are employed as independent contractors, or engaged as independent contractors, I should say, should receive no less than the minimum wage. It shouldn't be terribly controversial, but it's very interesting listening to the National Party trying to find excuses for the reason why they won't allow the minimum wage to be the standard for people who are independent contractors. We've heard them use arguments like, well, look, I'm going to quote from Alistair Scott, because I thought what he had to say was pretty insightful, actually, and I want to use that in both ways of using the phrase insightful, actually. It gave me great insight, but it could incite people as well. Because what he said was, yes, there are dodgy employers out there, his words, not mine, but he said, but that's no reason to have a law to stop it. Actually, that's the very reason to have a law to stop it. That is the very reason we have any employment law in this country at all, is because there are people who, if there are loopholes in the law, if there are not laws to prevent it, who will exploit vulnerable people. That is the very reason why we have any industrial relations law at all in this country, Mr Scott. So it is not an argument to say there are dodgy employers. There's always going to be some, never mind, let's not do anything about it. Well, on this side of the House, we're not content with that, because we don't think that's the sort of country that we want to live in. We want a country that believes that if people are engaged to provide their labour in whatever form, whether that be in a standard employment relationship, whether that be in the role as an independent contractor, however they offer their toil, that they ought to have some standards that go alongside that. The other spurious argument that's been used by the National Party, and I think this shows the level of desperation to try and argue their way out of what is a very simple bill. In fact, it's not complicated. The government's, I think, their strategy is to try and make it confusing, try and make it look complicated, but it is in fact very simple. And I think when David Parker got up and spoke before, what could be more simple than the way he put that? This is to ensure that people are not earning less than the minimum wage and are not being exploited. It's very, very simple. So the National Party are arguing that this bill should not pass because if an independent contractor gets the minimum wage, for at least the minimum wage for every hour that they toil for, that then they've got to pay their ACC contribution, then they've got to pay their tax, then they've got to pay a range of other measures. Well, guess what? So do employees. So do employees. They don't have all those things taken off and then get the minimum wage applied. Gosh, if they want to move that amendment, I'm going to vote for it, by the way. Be happy to support that sort of amendment to this bill. But that's not what actually occurs for ordinary, everyday employees in standard employment relationships. They have the law on their side requiring that they have to receive no less than $15.25 an hour. And then they pay their ACC levy, and then they pay their income tax. Not beforehand, but afterwards. So that is a ridiculous argument coming from, well, what it gets paid out of their wage, Jonathan. It gets paid, Mr Young, it gets paid out of their wage. Does the member honestly believe that it gets paid by the employer and then the employer pays them the minimum wage afterwards? Is that what because please, you're going to have to think about that very carefully and change your vote on this if that's what you truly believe actually happens for standard employment arrangements. I think anyone listening to this debate will know that that's a complete and utter nonsense. It does show how out of touch the National Party are. It seems to me that they are voting against this because they really don't want to ensure that people who are in these situations can demand to have at least the minimum wage. Mr Chair, I just want to go through who we're talking about so that people listening to this debate are really clear. So it's not everyone in every circumstance. The member, David Parker, has actually written a schedule of who this would apply to. So it would apply to people who are providing services under a contract for service in the following areas: building and construction services, cleaning services. I'm going to pause on that one there because that to me is the one where I see the most exploitation happening in this area, where people supposedly they're going to gain so much benefit out of being self-employed independent contractors by going and doing a job that most in this House would never have done, to go and toil for hour after hour after hour cleaning. And I know that what's happening in that industry is that more and more frequently those employees and those self-employed independent contractors are actually being made to clean larger and larger areas and being given a shorter and shorter period of time to do that. And in many instances, they've been given ridiculously small amounts of time that no one, no matter how fast, no matter what their superpower is, could ever clean that area in that amount of time. And it's this type of loophole that is allowing that to continue to happen. And it's this Schedule 2 that will put a stop to it. So cleaning services, courier services would also be covered by this legislation, as would food catering services and fast food delivery services. Food catering services, I think, are another area where there is rampant exploitation actually going on. And many of the cases that have gone through the courts that have been picked up by labour inspectors have in fact been in that particular area of food catering and the hospitality area. The member has brought a supplementary order paper forward that would remove the next item on Schedule 2, which is newspaper or pamphlet delivery services to letterboxes. So, well, he's so sure that he brought an SOP forward, Mr Scott, that you can vote for. And I look forward to Mr Scott casting his vote in favour of that, because when he spoke, that was seen to be the only area that he had a concern about. He didn't think it fitted. Well, turns out that the member is prepared to accept that argument and is prepared to amend the legislation in order to address that very issue. Personal home care support to an individual in an individual's house is another area. Pardon? Well, now Mr Scott wants to include them. He wants to include them now. That's where the confusion is. I think the confusion's on that side of the House, clearly not on this side of the House. Look, if Mr Scott wants to put that up as a SOP to the SOP, the amendment to the SOP, he'd have my vote. I'll put that on the record right now. Very happy to support that. But I'd want to see that the National Party would be prepared to support it as well, because if they genuinely do have a concern for what is happening in this area, if they genuinely do want to address making sure that the minimum wage is an entitlement for people when they offer their labour, no matter in which form they offer their labour, then they should be supporting this bill. There is another amendment to Schedule 2 that I want to speak to briefly, Mr Chair, and that is that where originally Schedule 2 had also included public entertainment services as an actor, musician or singer, that David Parker has brought forward a supplementary order paper which would make sure that that applied to people who were doing that in a professional capacity. And you know, I admire him for doing that. I think it's important for bringing that forward, because I can tell you no one wants to pay me the minimum wage for my karaoke. So I just, you know, I was a bit worried that I might be captured, that my car karaoke might be captured under under the schedule, but it's very good that that's been now clarified. Thank you. Well, we see my colleagues know a little too much about my car karaoke. They want to pay me not to continue to indulge in that. So it would be professional entertainment services that would be captured by this, and I think that's right, and I think that's proper. The manufacture of clothing, footwear or textiles would also be captured by this. Now, telemarketing services is the next one on the list, and that's a pretty interesting field too. It's a growing field.
I'm calling Dr. Pamji Palmer.